when Vader fought a 200-foot giant squid completely underwater. Darth Vader has defeated countless enemies and hordes of creatures from across the galaxy. He has single-handedly killed cybernetic rancors, space whales, and even dragons. But one of his most impressive feats was his battle against a giant squid of Mon Cala, the oceanic homeworld of Admiral Akbar. When aggressively negotiating Mon Cala's loyalty to Emperor Palpatine, Vader ended up deep underwater and face-to-face with a giant squid over 200 feet long. Using most of his concentration to keep his damaged suit from collapsing, Vader was in a life-and-death struggle. How did Vader manage to win, and what did it cost him? That's today's tale. Let's start at the beginning. Darth Vader and Governor Tarkin had just been introduced to each other, and they were still feeling each other out. Palpatine, in his first few months as Emperor, sent the two commanders to deal with problems on Mon Cala. The planet's leader, King Li Char, was refusing to accept new Imperial etiquettes that were sweeping the galaxy. Palpatine wouldn't allow any system, especially one as important as Mon Cala, to act independently. To do so, especially this early in the Empire's existence, would invite other planets to behave in the same way, and soon enough he would be facing open rebellions. He hadn't launched the Clone Wars and killed off all the Jedi just to rule over a fraction of the galaxy. Palpatine wanted it all, so he sent the Emperor's two most important commanders to quell the commotion on Mon Cala. Vader, along with his Inquisitors, led an expedition on the surface. He heard that King Li Char's recent actions were guided by a Jedi hiding on the planet. Vader would find where the Jedi was hiding and purge him. Meanwhile, Tarkin stayed in near orbit, aboard a ship in the Imperial Navy, and negotiated with King Li Char. Despite having a treaty between them, Tarkin would not yield. Just hours prior, an Imperial shuttle had been destroyed, and with it, Imperial soldiers. Tarkin took this as an act of war, believing King Li Char's military to have a part in the assassination of the Imperial officials on board the ship. Tarkin wouldn't listen to the native Mon Cala who claimed innocence. If they claimed innocence, the Empire would continue to push their superior troops onto the surface. The Mon Cala were barely clinging on due to their primitive weapons and combat skills. Tarkin played on this inadequacy. When Tarkin's advisor warned caution, he was staunch in his belief that the Empire would be more than ready for any form of attack the natives would launch. "There's no surprises for us on Mon Cala," Tarkin plainly stated, claiming to have seen what they were capable of in previous battles. Darth Vader, down on the surface, leading the Inquisitors into battle, would soon learn just how wrong Tarkin was. The stronghold he and his battalion were taking was being won in increasingly brutal ways. The once peaceful oceanic planet was now covered in images of dead natives sprawled on landing pads and flames reaching through the tranquil sea. Any trace of Mon Cala infrastructure was being wiped away, explosion by explosion. However, although the Empire was winning the battle, Vader still pushed his fighters forward with haste. Vader knew King Li Char from his time during the Clone Wars. He knew that such a proud leader would not have abandoned the planet in this time of despair. Meaning Vader and his Inquisitors had a chance at finding not only the king, but his Jedi informer. Despite the protestations of his troops, the Imperial battalion ascended upon the king's palace. The Jedi in question was Master Bar, with a team of light-side peacekeepers was aiding in the protection of the peaceful planet. And he knew exactly who was behind the evil Sith armor that encapsulated Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker. Bar's allies had no idea of the importance this revelation carried, but the Jedi Master knew that after the great displays of evil this particular Jedi carried out during Order 66, they should be very afraid of what he planned here on Mon Cala. Reaching out to King Li Char with the news, the Jedi implored the leader to take drastic measures. King Li Char was at odds. He personally didn't believe that Tarkin nor the Empire would escalate the current situation. If the Mon Cala evacuated to the ocean depths and left their surface buildings to the Empire, then they would be safe. The King of Mon Cala once again told the Jedi Counselor that he didn't want to make the situation worse, but Master Bar wouldn't listen. He said simply, "The Empire will never leave, you must know that." Feeling as though he had no other choice, King Li Char nodded and agreed. He ordered the release of Mon Cala's secret weapon, but not before Vader attacked with his Inquisitors. Vader, without mercy, thrashed the king around the royal chambers, prying the king open for answers. He would find out if the king was hiding a Jedi, and where he was being kept. The situation was worsening all around the planet. But just when it seemed the Inquisitors were about to get their answers, the secret weapon appeared. With a huge, world-shaking quake, the seas erupted with crashing waves and spewing water. A pod of gigantic, sentient whalodons breached the surface. The giant whales, as large as the tallest tower on Mon Cala, leapt into the air and came crashing down. Their wake sent a tsunami over the city. Vader summoned the dark side of the Force with every fiber of his being. With 2 outstretched hands, he attempted to block the tsunami from taking him and his Inquisitors. But he was unsuccessful. They were swept into the rising tide, and the towers of the city of Dak surrounding them sunk. Now thrust into the great Ugnis Trench, Vader's battle had become a new one, surrounded by darkness and water. Luckily, his lightsaber provided illumination, and his usually punishing suit provided life-saving oxygen, until a rupture in his armor would soon render all his systems useless. Desperately swimming to safety, Vader was truly out of his depth. A rare sight for the powerful Sith. But he wasn't going anywhere fast. Something reached up from the depths. A tentacle, green, thick, and covered with 6-inch spikes, wrapped around the Sith Lord's leg. In the mayhem, Vader lost his lightsaber, and it fell to the depths below. Vader sank lower and lower, light disappeared from sight. But he managed to see one thing. The squid, in all its gigantic glory, swirling its gargantuan tentacles around him, while its huge teeth prepared to ingest him. It pulled him closer and closer to its mouth. Its tentacles squeezed excruciatingly tight. Vader had nowhere to run, so he put all his trust in the Force. He mustered all of his strength. He was losing oxygen fast, and his suit was being crushed. It wouldn't last much longer. Vader reached out with his hands, and suddenly the squid's pupil shrinks. Using an ancient Jedi mind trick, Vader managed to put the creature under his control. Ejected out of its grip and onto a rocky surface far down in the sea trench, the Sith Lord proudly reclaimed his lightsaber from the tangled web of the squid's grasp. By that time, Vader's backup squadron of stormtroopers appeared with their subaquatic speeders and deep-sea armor. They were searching the trench for the Sith Lord. Vader held onto the squid's body and commanded it through the Force to swim towards the surface. As they swam, they passed the bodies and debris from the battles above. It was a graveyard of Vader's own doing. Eventually, Vader got close enough to make contact with the subaquatic stormtroopers. As they had ascended, the lower pressure caused the giant squid's eye to fall apart, and it leaked into the water around them. He let go of the giant squid. At this point, all that was left of its eye was a giant black cavity. The low pressure and the strain of the Dark Lord's mind control left it limp and lifeless in the sea, and its corpse slowly floated down. Vader gave the signal to the troopers to bring the speeder towards him. If he had gotten to the craft, perhaps minutes later, Vader would have likely perished himself. No amount of imposing armor, lightsaber combat skills, or force powers could save him from the depths of the sea and loss of oxygen therein. Though his suit was designed to keep him alive, even in space, as soon as the suit's systems were compromised, he was just as vulnerable as everyone else. The battle-weary and soaking wet Sith Lord slumped over as he took a moment of respite on the transport. Ignoring all of the crew's concerns, he asked to know one simple thing.
"Tell me, the Jedi is dead?"
A feeble Inquisitor responded, "No, not yet, but we..." Vader didn't even let the soldier finish his sentence. In an effort to not let his anger at this answer explode all at once, he immediately demanded to know if the same was true of King Li Char. "We don't know. The king was swept away when the tidal wave hit." The Sith Lord realized if he needed something to be done, he had to do it himself. This fight with one of the sea's most dreaded creatures was one of the only times Vader would be in life-threatening peril. At this point of his Imperial employment, he had managed to excel through his training, meaning the many different types of enemy he encountered could be dispatched with ease. Yet, the fact that Tarkin underestimated the native strength and his battalion of troopers and Inquisitors failed to secure the mission objective meant that Vader realized how, even in the depths of his despair, his survival and that of the Empire would often come down to his raw strength and mastery of the Force.